Hi, I'm B from Next Mechanics, and in today's video, we're going to be making my very own Transformers fighting animation, animated in Blender. So I wanted to make this animation for about 5 months now. I've gone sidetracked, I've wanted to do easier projects to have a more consistent upload schedule and things like that, but that animation idea has just stayed in my brain and I need it out. Now, I want to make as few new assets as possible because every single time I go to do one of these, I make a bunch of new models and I get bored and then I don't actually do any animating. So I'm going to be reusing all of the previous character models I've made, but we are going to make a new background. See, my original plan for this animation was to have them fight outside of the Ark in the desert, but I thought doing a nightclub would actually be more akin to the 80s cartoon when Soundwave and Blaster first battled. So before we do anything, we need to model that. Now, I'm keeping this extremely simple, it doesn't need to be overwhelming with detail, we're going to be focusing on the character models anyway. All I need to make sure is that we got 4 walls, a floor, and lots of lights. And also, I'd love it to have a dance floor. I am going to fill it with some tables and speakers just to give it a bit more extra detail, otherwise it feels kind of empty. I also noticed in the original cartoon there's a giant glass window, so I want to add that, and I'm also going to use it for something later on, but we'll get to that. Right now though, we need to focus on giving our model texture, because right now it's just bland and white and we need to make it fit in with the rest of stuff. So, I'm actually reusing textures from my old Transformers projects. I'm going for a very much Spider-Verse 80s cartoon NPR shading, which basically just means that I'm going for that cartoony look. This means that every texture's got a basic cell shading setup, which is a mix of a shader RBG, a diffuse BSDF, a color ramp, and then I also add some extra Voronoi textures and wave textures and bricks, all with various messing around of the dials and stuff just to get it looking about right. None of this is meant to be precise, it's just me having fun with the computer. So, we've got our nightclub. What about the Transformers? Well, even though all of them have a dedicated video, I'll give you a brief overview right now. So each Transformer is his own model, but they all follow the same sort of pattern with the way I make them. First of all, they all need their vehicle modes or alt modes made first. It doesn't matter if that's a boombox, cassette tape, it needs to be made first. That's because we need to make sure that the proportions stay the same for the robot mode. Otherwise, it's going to look obvious that we're switching models around. Once we've finished modeling and texturing the alt mode, it's time to do the robot mode. Now, to make the robot mode, we actually take the alt mode and chop it up into sections. I try and follow natural seam lines of the geometry, but sometimes I have to get the knife tool out just to make pad cuts. Sometimes you even do a boolean cut with a cube just to get it perfectly flat. Once the vehicle mode's all cut up, you can then start spreading that out into vaguely the robot shape, and then we add the new unique robot parts like the hands, the head, torso, that sort of thing. Once we finish modeling the robot, it's time to rig him with a skeleton. This has things like inverse kinematics in the legs so that it automatically moves like a chain, just making the animation process a little bit easier. Now finally, we make a third model. We got car, we got robot, it's time for the mid-transform model, which is how we get from robot to car. What this is it's the robot mode squished back into the car mode shape, with some extra shape keys and additional armature pieces to just help make the parts feasibly move from A to B. Then, I actually save this in the alt mode form all scrunched up, so that when I go to animate with it, I can pull him all apart, and I can just save the keyframes of him complete in alt mode. It means I could do whatever I want with him, I could have him in robot mode dancing for a little while, and then I can just add those keyframes at the end of the timeline, and he'll perfectly slide back into alt mode. It's not perfect by any means, and there's a little bit of tweaking needed for each animation, but it helps speed up the process a lot. And so far, making them work almost like toys has been the best way I've found to make them feasibly look like they can transform. So we have the nightclub, we have the robots, they're all textured with various NPR shading. It's time for the animation. Now, a few things with my animation process. I'm adding a stop mode add-on made by Southern Shotty to all of the animation on the characters so that they're animated on 2s. The reason we do a modifier instead of just slowing down the clip so everything's in 2s is it means that the camera is still animated on 1s and it looks a lot smoother. Otherwise it kind of glitches and it looks weird. Another thing is that when I'm changing the camera angles, I'm actually using markers and then binding the cameras to markers. That means that it will automatically snap the camera to where I want it to be, and that way I don't have to have that weird editing out of the camera frantically trying to move from point A to B. You can sometimes set it up so that at one keyframe it's here, and then literally the next frame it's moved, but sometimes it renders it trying to get from point A to B, and it just looks messy. So, with all that out of the way, it's time to actually start animating, and I would like to say I planned this out more than I did. I had basic ideas. I need an introductory scene, I need the introduction of the dancing, and then obviously the fighting, and then a conclusion. That was about as far as I planned. So let's do that introductory scene. We need to introduce the environment, so we're going to have a pan round of the nightclub, and then I want it to zoom in on Soundwave in his cassette mode. We're sort of introducing the area and the antagonist at the same time. Then we need to introduce Blaster, so we'll have him walk through the door as if he's been trying to hunt down Soundwave or find him. And once we do that, we need to obviously show that Soundwave even is a Transformer. So, let's make him transform. And this is actually reusing a transformation from an old test that I showed in my animation reel last week. I obviously refined it a little to work better in the new environment, but it saved me a lot of time. Again, this is saved keyframes of robot and cassette, and then all I do after that is just try and make the A to B a little better. So that's him pushing himself off the table rather than just floating and sliding into robot mode, which Blender really likes to do. We're gonna get from point A to B, and we don't care how. So after that, I want them to have a bit of back and forth. I want them to talk. My last proper animation with these characters, none of them talked, and it kind of felt a bit weird. It was on purpose because I was intimidated, until I found a style of mouth animation that I really like. It's called replacement animation, and it's typically used in stop motion. Think Robot Chicken, with Buddy Thunderstruck and those sort of skits. It's where they replace the mouth for each different phenome shape, so that's mouth shape. What I did is I hand drew in Procreate each individual mouth frame that I wanted, trying to get a wide variety of mouth shapes that'll allow me to do most words at least. And then I followed Southern Shotty's tutorial. I know 2 things of his in this video, you should go check him out, he's great. And the cool thing about his tutorial is he shows that you can take the image, shrink wrap it over the face of your character, and then bind it to a bone, which we can use to animate. So what I can do is I can have all of my images in a sequence, and I can say, alright, when the bone is this high, I want image number 1, and then when the bone is this low, I want image number 10. And so what I can do to give it that replacement animation style is I make it so that I copy that keyframe of 1, move it right before I want number 10 to show up, copy paste it, and then it will snap to that picture instead of sliding through all the pictures to get to there. This is an awful lot of information at once, but basically all that means is I can make the picture change to the other picture how I want it to. So now we need the actual audio we're going to animate the mouth to. Now I used Esus, which is an online AI tool. I know, AI, bleh. I'm not a huge fan of it, but all this tool does is it removes the background music of the clip.
I've been waiting a long time for this. You poor excuse for a sound system. All talk, no shock. I've been waiting a long time for this. You poor excuse for a sound system. All talk, no shock.
I dislike AI being used to create the entire artwork, but to help speed up the process of something I was gonna do by hand anyway, that feels more reasonable. So now that I've got the audio track in Blender, I replay it over and over and over again, just trying to listen to the different mouth shapes, miming it myself, trying to just match up the character to the sounds. And one thing I found with this replacement type animation is the less mouth shapes, the better. If your mouth is constantly flapping open and shut, it's gonna look kinda weird. I've done it on some of my older tests like Starscream here, and it just, I mean, you decide.
The Autobots would have lost eons ago if I'd been calling the shots.
Yeah, it's not great, but when I did it on Hot Rod with less face shapes,
not bad for an old-timer.
That's a lot better, isn't it? So, less changing of the shapes it was. Soundwave was a lot easier than Blaster. It's just his mouth play going up and down. I did make sure that every time it went up and down, I actually copy-pasted the up and down so that it didn't change how high or low it went, just to keep it consistent. So now that the talking's animated, it's time to make them fight. And I want it to be as much of a dance fight as it is a fist fight, so I need them to actually play the music in universe. It's got some fancy name for it, I can't remember what it is, please let me know down in the comments, but basically, the audio is meant to be played in universe, so to show that, I want Blaster to just activate his cassette deck buttons that are on his torso, and have him groove along. Now again, I've imported the music into the video editor in Blender so that I can actually tie my animations to the audio. Sometimes, if you have too many assets like me, it'll start skipping frames and play back at 18 frames a second instead of 30, which can mess with the timings. I found that I would end up hiding things like the tables and speakers just to get the playback running a bit smoother. Then when I thought I was finished with the animation, I'd show them again, and then I would just make sure that the models aren't clipping through them. Now one thing I did find is I was actually getting used to animating with it lagging a bit, so what I'd end up doing is I would render it, and then I would actually slow it down back to the laggy stage in DaVinci Resolve. It's not great, but for my stop motion-y style, it seemed to work fine. I did find that sometimes slowing down the video would make the camera move on twos, which is what we're trying to avoid, so try and get the characters moving as best as you can, and then try and only slow it down as much as you need to, the less the better. Now I am not a professional animator in any sense of the word, so this is a very simplified kind of animation, really. I'm going for very good key poses and then trying to just make it interpolate nicely. Interpolate basically means how it gets a joint from A to B, and like I said, Blender likes to get that no matter how. So what I end up doing is I have to add extra keyframes in between so that it doesn't phase through itself. You can have bits like he'll go to push his button, and instead of just hitting the button, he phases through his torso towards the button. So I just add an extra keyframe that has him bring his arm out, so that it brings his arm out, and then into the button. It's very simple, but it works. Now a little thing I'm trying to make sure I'm doing is secondary motion. So most characters would have things like hair or clothes or jewelry that would sort of continue moving after the main character's moved. Now these are robots, and they don't have anything loose on them, so it's hard to do that. But I can make them move like bobbleheads. Whenever one of them deals a really heavy punch, I want to make it so that their head continues wobbling just a couple frames more than the body. The bobblehead look can sometimes look weird if you do it way too much, but if you just do subtle, ever so slight extra movements, it makes him flow into the punch rather than looking like a stiff cardboard man. Now I had a great time doing the fight scene. I had stuff like Soundwave picking up a table and throwing it at Blaster, and to do that, I used Child of Constraint. What this basically means is that I can say, hey, I'm a table, I'm doing my own thing, but once I reach this frame where Soundwave's hand is close to it, it can actually attach to his hand and follow it along, which means that I'm not having to hand animate making the table follow the path of his hand. I know, making someone hold something. It's not really that difficult once you know what you're doing, but believe me, on that first animation 6 months ago with Jazz picking up Blaster's boombox, that was revolutionary to me. For things like Soundwave picking up Blaster, because he does it so quick, I didn't really bother. It was actually easier to hand animate in a lot of ways. It does mean that if you look super close, it doesn't seem to move quite right, but it's good enough for me. Now again, I'm flipping all the images around to make him talk, and I'm also trying to make Blaster change his expressions mid-fight. If he's just sat there statically with a grin the entire time, it looks a little weird, so occasionally grimacing when he gets punched and things like that just adds a bit more character. When it gets to Soundwave's turn in the fight scene, I wanted to show how he's changing the music. It's his turn with it now. Now he doesn't necessarily have a big obvious button on him that I could press. I mean, he does on the shoulder, but it's not as good as Blaster's. Also, I've already done that, so how do I change that up? Well, I wanted to have it display on his chest. Sometimes in the cartoon, he would do blueprints and schematics on the chest, almost like a TV screen. So I figured I could do the same. What I did is I got my music, Sweet Dreams Are Made of These, and I put that in DaVinci Resolve, got a bunch of meters on there so I could get the audio fluctuating and changing, and then I just screen recorded it in OBS. Then I could take that video and use it as an image texture in Blender. Then I'd add a mix node to his regular glass texture and keyframe that, and it would just transition seamlessly. Now a big deal about this is I want each character to have their own unique music. Blaster's got the sort of funky, let's groove tonight, Soundwave's got that synthy Sweet Dreams Are Made of These, and finally, Jazz has got the hip hop. Speaking of Jazz, let's get him in here. So Blaster calls for help, using a clip from the 80s movie spliced up, and again, changing all those images to make him talk with the mouth. And now we need to add Jazz, and I was trying to think, alright, how do I introduce him in a cool, dramatic way? Well, I've got that giant glass window there, so what if he smashes through it? But I can't just have him smash through, that's like, hey, can you help? Has he just been waiting the entire time to come in? Nah. So we need him to drive. And to animate driving cars on their own is pretty easy. You just make the floor move. I animated his wheels spinning continuously to make it look right. I made the car body wiggle a little so it wasn't so stiff. Then with the ground, I added lots of lines on it so you could obviously see it moving, and then I made it so that it started here, and it ended all the way over there, and then Blender would interpolate that as just sliding it, which when you put it in the camera's view, moving around the car with the wheels turning, it just looks like him driving. It's a lot easier to do it this way because it means that the car can just stay put, we don't need to fiddle with moving around, getting the camera to follow it. The camera can just spin around this static object, and it looks about right. So, once he crashes through the wall, it's time to swap to that mid-transform model. Then, I do a quick cut to swap him back to the robot model, just to make the animating a little bit easier. Now, I know that Blaster and Jazz don't necessarily do everything in the old cartoon, but for this fight scene, I wanted them to be pretty coordinated. So I made sure that their keyframes would line up, checking between the two, so that they could do synchronized punches, and my favorite thing, which was the team-up. I really love the idea of Transformers taking advantage of the mass shifting of their alt modes. Blaster goes from a huge robot to a tiny boombox just mid-transformation, mass shifting. So I thought, what if we took advantage of that and did a fastball special? So he transforms into the boombox, gets picked up by Jazz using that child of constraint again, and then he flings him back. And again, copy-pasting the robot and the boombox modes and all the keyframes so it just perfectly go from A to B, and then I just change the pose so it fits better. And then we do another cut back to the robot mode model, and the only way you can tell is because I forgot to move the feet. So he's got really long toes in the mid-transform model. Now, with all of these animations, if you slow them down, you can see the clipping and the transformation, I know. And so I'm taking advantage that people will hopefully not watch too closely. Now, the next bit was one of the hardest animation clips, which is this 2-second clip of them all walking. I know, it's 2 seconds, it's not that long. Why is it so hard? Because they're all moving. My computer already doesn't love playing back the Transformer models I make in real time. They're not really optimized, which means that you have one Transformer there, it's running at maybe 30, sometimes 18 frames a second in the playback. You add 2, that cuts it down to 10 frames in the playback. You add 3, that's like 854 frames in the playback? So I had to animate each of them separately, but then toggle them back on and do a very bad playback just to see if they didn't clip into each other. And then I had to convincingly make a load of them walk and move and not seem too static. I know some of the legs move a bit jankily here, especially Blaster at the beginning of the scene. I'm not super thrilled with that one, but they were good enough to just carry on to the final fight. For this, I want them to absolutely just beat down on Soundwave. We're doing the Mama's Gonna Knock You Out song, and I want them to knock him out. Now, in this bit, I want Soundwave to feel overwhelmed. They're both just relentlessly hitting on him and smacking him down to the ground, and I wanted the audience to feel a bit of that overwhelming as well, which means I made the camera spin around them all. I know it can be a bit too much overwhelming for some people, but that's kind of what I want. It's that element of everyone's just punching him and overloading him, and then eventually he falls to the ground and that's it. So now, it's time for the end, the triumphant ride into the sunset. We got that classic G1 music, and we need him to ride off in his car mode. Now in my old animation, I made them transform off screen, but that feels kinda cheating now that I'm trying to improve my animation. So Jazz gets a very deliberate full body shot of him transforming slowly so that you can see how it works, which means I needed to make it a bit more believable. Something I find really useful is if you actually make the camera move with the character. If you have it start up with the robot head, and then lower down to frame the car mode, it sort of follows the character and looks a lot more natural. Then for Blaster, well, last time I kind of let him just hit the ground, and that was for comedic effect, but for this one I want him to, get to ride off with Jazz. So I made a whole interior for Jazz, with an opening door and everything using shape keys. Shape keys are where you tell the mesh to look like this at one time, and then you alter the mesh as a shape key, and then you can keyframe to get from A to B again. And for this, instead of changing the mesh too drastically, I just moved the door. So he opens the door, he's got the seats, and then I reused that transformation keyframe again for Blaster, and he sits inside, and then he gets parented, and in that final bit where he rides off, he's actually just the boombox model, using an empty. What do I mean by empty? Well, the boombox is made up of like 18 different pieces, but since it's a boombox, it only acts as one. So I just have a cube that I can see, but that doesn't get rendered in the final piece. And I just say, hey, that cube, all the little pieces are connected to that cube. And then for this, I make that cube connected to the car, which means that it all just moves as one solid piece. Now, due to my poor planning, I hadn't decided how it was really going to end. I knew I wanted to have some sort of highlight on Soundwave. So, we have the camera move up, highlight on Soundwave's face, and now I want to have his eyes look turned off and then activate, giving you that bit of a jump scare. And for this, I can actually keyframe the colors and the emission strength on his lenses. So I can just take a keyframe of all the normal colors, slide that further along for when he's activated, and then tweak them to make them look a bit more dim and dark for when he's almost dead. Now I want the video to fade out to black, but I want the eyes to stay a little bit longer. To do this, I'm not going to try and fiddle around and tweak stuff in Blender. I'm just going to go straight to DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is a free video editing software, and I use it for all of my videos. To get the eyes to stay glowing, I Luma keyed the eyes out of the frame, copy-pasted it, and then just added that to the end. So when everything fades to black, it just shows the keyframed eyes, and then that fades to black a second later. It's very subtle, but it just makes it a little more creepy. So now that everything is rendered, it's time to edit it all together. Each clip is exported as an FFmpeg with an MP4 encoding. I then bring that into DaVinci Resolve and start tweaking with the video speeds, getting it to match that original frame rate. Like I said, some of them play back in double speed because I was accidentally animating to the lag instead of optimizing the scene. Once every single clip is added, I then go back in and by hand add all of the sound effects. These are taken directly from the 80s cartoon, just to give it that more authentic feel. And of course, the music. Hopefully, I don't get copyright claimed. I'm recording this video before I've uploaded it, so we'll see. But with all of that edited together, I think it's time to finally see the final animation.
I've been waiting a long time for this. You poor excuse for a sound system all talk, no shock. Longer we can hold out.
Come on, man. And with the local DBC news, LL Cool J with a triumphant comeback. But tonight, don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years. I'm letting my kids put something on me. Listen to my bass go explosion. Overpowering. Attention, I'm tired. Lyrics that I make.
That's some of my best animation yet, don't you think? I know some of the character movements are a little bit janky here and there, and I could have spent a lot longer refining it, but for me, good enough was good enough. If you like the animation, I uploaded it last week all on its own, so feel free to share that around with other Transformers fans you know, and let's see if we can get it to 3,000 views like the previous one. Maybe even more. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video and saw the behind the scenes on how I made this, and if you like what you saw and you want to see more, feel free to subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Farewell!